Now it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, is there a point to nuclear weapons? Russia's invasion of Ukraine has raised the question of nuclear war among the general public, and this is being further exacerbated as President Zelensky has warned that officials have told Russians to prepare for nuclear warfare, with even US President Joe Biden warning journalists that Putin wasn't joking about using weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine, which I don't think was helpful of him to do that, really, seriously. Moscow has escalated the nuclear rhetoric over the last few months, so we have to wonder what will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. If they are used, the world can be assured of mutual destruction, quite literally war games. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is there a point to nuclear weapons? Firstly, I'm joined by ex-senior British military advisor to US Central Command, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, thank you so much for joining me. OK, so first of all, is it a good idea for people like Joe Biden to sort of start building up the idea that nuclear weapons are potentially going to be used?
Yes, because there are various audiences that he's trying to influence there. And one of those is not just the Russians, it's people like China and India who don't want Russia to use those weapons as well, because even though those states have not condemned Russia so far, they don't want a world where there is potentially nuclear proliferation in the future. And that is what the use of nuclear weapons by Russia would do. So, for example, Taiwan or Japan and South Korea, which would be destabilizing potentially for China in that environment, and it wouldn't help Russia in the long term. So, for example, Poland, Finland, probably the Baltic states would also have a rush for nuclear weapons, or at least be living under a nuclear umbrella.
Yeah, but what is the point of them, right? Because you say that it's a sort of, but what is the point? If somebody strikes a nuclear weapon, then the other will strike a nuclear weapon, it's game over. So what is the point of that? Surely it will mean that it will never happen, or if it does happen, it's the end of the world.
Well, you have to go back to the first order thing, that everyone who's a major nuclear power has signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that is to get rid of all nuclear weapons. So what is it that prohibits those nuclear weapons being just ceased and got rid of? Well, two things, really. The security environment and the fact that the political context is not that we are the world, we are the future all together in one basket. And therefore, you then look at why and when might they be used. And they can only be used, and this also was signed up bizarrely in January this year by all the 5 major P5 powers, that they should be serve only defensive purposes, deter aggression, and prevent war. And that is why there will be such consequences if they are used. It is not correct to say, I think, Nana, as you intimated, that there will be a linear progression from all the way up to what we would call spasm warfare, that is intercontinental ballistic missiles between, for example, Russia and America. That just can't see that happening. So to say there will be an escalation of escalations all the way up to intercontinental ballistic missile and wiping out the known world is not necessarily a linear progression that you would see.
Yeah, but you say that, but a lot of people didn't think that Vladimir Putin would do what he's done in Ukraine, and he has. In fact, whilst Vladimir Putin was hovering along the borders of Ukraine, people were saying, oh, he's not going to go in, even though he'd sent 110,000 troops or so. And I noticed you mentioned the non-proliferation, I can't say that word, treaty, but didn't loads of them sign the Budapest Memorandum, so that if, Russia signed it themselves, saying that they wouldn't attack a neighbour state, they would help Ukraine, and it turns out they're the perpetrators of it. So these so-called treaties, I think, people like Russia, countries like Russia, leaders there, are probably laughing at us for even thinking that these will be honoured.
But that's the point from Russia's perspective, that nuclear extortion and blackmail leads them to achieving their objectives by coercive diplomacy. And that's what they're really banking on in terms of saying we're not bluffing. Now, that doesn't mean we'll respond in a nuclear context if they were to do so. There's a lot of conventional armory out there to deter Russia from doing those things. And we have to be really clear that this is, nuclear weapons are not like any conventional weapons. A conventional explosive have a blast and a shock impact. There are so many other impacts with nuclear weapons, including the sort of nuclear radiation bubble which goes along with that. So, for example, just a 1 kiloton nuclear weapon would have a downstream 10-kilometre downwind hazard with 25,000 rads per minute, which is a lethal dose. So the notion that these sort of can be used in a tactical sense is also something that some people question, that there's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. If you cross that Rubicon, you've probably excluded yourself from the world, from the future, and Russia would absolutely be excluded from the world and would not be the same sort of state in the future. They would just be an international pariah, and that would include India and China.
But you talk of tactical nuclear weapons. Now, from my understanding, people are saying, oh, you can use tactical nuclear weapons, it will just take out our battle force. And I'm glad you pointed out that that doesn't really seem to be a realistic perspective on it, because you can't stop radiation from going, oh, we're going to stop it at this line. And, there's the cloud and there's all the other things that come with it. Is it true that the tactical nuclear weapons that we have, even the least powerful, are at least around about 9 times the power of the nuclear weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima?
Well, you can dial a yield, but dialing a yield still means that you have other impacts which you would not have from those conventional weapons. That would include the radiation, it would include the fallout, it would include the sort of flash burns, which were 2/3 of the casualties after Hiroshima, and you don't know which way the wind's going to blow. So people would say that you could potentially use this in 3 ways. The first one is that you could use it as a demonstration. Let's say they were to put it on Snake Island, now deserted after being fought over twice, just to say, we told you, we're not bluffing. But again, there will be a downwind hazard to that. The second one, as you sort of intimated, is where people say that they can be used tactically. That is this notion that they're there to win a battle. But if you're going to try and win a battle, you've got your troops on the other side. So that's not really credible. And the third reason, or third way, is really what we saw at Hiroshima. And again, that may be viable if you were to use an airburst weapon, because there's a difference between an airburst and a ground burst nuclear weapon, over a number of cities to kill many hundreds of thousands of people and compel an enemy to your will. That's what the object of war is. It is fought for political objectives, not for military objectives.
Yeah, so in your view then, yes or no, is there any point to them at all? Just a yes or no?
There is a point to them. That is a point to do with defensive purposes and deterrence.
OK. Stay right there, Chip. I'm just going to bring on Scarlett MccGwire, see what her thoughts are on there. Scarlett MccGwire, she's a former Labour advisor. Scarlett, your view then, nuclear weapons. Chip says there is a point to them. Do you think that they're a bit pointless and shouldn't be used?
Of course they shouldn't be used. I mean, I think Chip and I would both agree that we don't want them used. What worries me is that we say that nuclear weapons should only be a deterrent. And then we have Putin saying, if you go into what I call Russia, which is what we call Ukraine, right? I mean, the 4 states that he has annexed and he now calls Russia. If you go into those, I will unleash nuclear weapons. He's made no secret of that. He will call that defensive, and he will say he's using nuclear weapons as a deterrent. It is absolutely terrifying, right? And the fact that Britain has nuclear weapons, I don't think makes us sleep any easier in our beds in London, say, than in Paris or in Rome, where they don't. I mean, actually, we're more likely to be an object for Putin after he's completely wrecked Ukraine. I mean, the problem is that when you get people who are not necessarily rational, in charge of nuclear weapons, I mean, and this has always been said, then the world becomes a very frightening place. I mean, frankly, it was the same when Trump was president. Trump said, what's the point of nuclear weapons if we can't use them? Thank goodness it never came to it. But I think nuclear weapons... Hold
on, Scarlett. Hold on, Scarlett. I want to stop you there. Because when Trump was president, he was actually more of a peacemaker than any of the others. There weren't any new wars. And I suspect if he was still in power, and he's even said it himself, that this probably wouldn't be happening. So I don't think he's a fair...
No. I'm quoting Trump. He said, what is the point of nuclear weapons if you don't use them, right? Actually, always America has said, and Britain has said, that they are a deterrent. That's all they are. They are a deterrent. They're to stop wars from happening, right? And what I'm saying is we are now in a position where it is quite scary, where we've got a man who is in charge of nuclear weapons, and he might well unleash them on us, and then there is going to be a nuclear war. And that is why it was so important, and it hasn't been done, that we got rid of all nuclear weapons, right? Because they're not a deterrent. They're only, if somebody in charge of them is...
Let me bring Chip on this, because Scarlett says that we need to get rid of all nuclear weapons because they're not a deterrent. Chip?
Well, they're the ultimate guarantor of sovereignty, so they are a deterrent. And as I said at the start, the reason that you still have nuclear weapons is because the security environment and the potential political context between states means that you can't get rid of them. Everyone is signed up to Article 6 of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. If we all lived happily together, they wouldn't be there. We don't. They are there to do that ultimate deterrence purpose. We are not going to get nuked by Russia.
Scarlett, what do you think? He said that we need them.
Well, he's just said we're not going to get nuked by Russia, and I don't think we know. I think that is the problem, and that's why a lot of people are very, very scared, because as Nana said at the beginning, an awful lot of people said Putin will never go into Ukraine. He went into Ukraine. He said he was going to do it, and he did it. He says he'll use nuclear weapons. We don't know. That is the problem. We don't know whether he's bluffing or not. And of course, we don't live in a world of peace. And I think getting rid of nuclear weapons, is almost impossible. But I don't think nuclear weapons are a good thing, because ultimately, as Nana also said at the beginning, they wipe out everything. That is the problem.
Yeah, well, they do wipe out everything. That I did say that, and that is a problem, Chip.
That's right. If you get to a spasm warfare, we don't know because we haven't got enough empirical evidence, and that's a really, really good thing. We've got nowhere near anywhere since the Second World War, and that really includes Crimea, because people understand that the nuclear genie getting out of the bottle is somewhere you don't want to go. It is actually Oppenheimer's thing when he saw the first nuclear bomb, that I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, and people are very, very reluctant to do this. All nuclear strategic theory is actually to do with the non-use of these weapons, not really to do with the use of them.
Well, then wouldn't it be better if we just didn't have them all together, though? Surely that would be a much better thing, Do you not think, Chip?
You're absolutely right, but that comes back down to this fact that political context and the security environment do not allow that, and will never allow that when you've got a competitive international environment between inimical powers.
Scarlett, would you say that we should perhaps get rid of our nuclear weapons? And would you encourage countries like ours to do that?
I think what's really frightening is that the fact that we have nuclear weapons doesn't actually make a difference. That's what's scary. Now, I agree that I can say that easily because America has nuclear weapons, and we think that, if London is bombed, then America will hit Moscow, right? And then that's the beginning of massive escalation. The problem with all these treaties is they're great as long as you've got completely rational people in charge of countries. But we have Vladimir Putin, and we don't know what makes him work. That is the real problem. We've got Vladimir Putin who has threatened to use them. Whether he'll use them or not, we're not sure. Has threatened to use them. And, people say, I don't know because I'm not an expert, people say, that he'd rather go, he doesn't really care what happens if he loses.